there is a very major crisis, the post-COVID era, which is a crisis of 200 million people having gone below the poverty line. Almost 100 million people have lost their jobs. And then there is a crisis of climate action, that the earth may survive, but we as human beings will be extinct if we are not able to reach 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. And therefore, all of us have to believe in climate action. And then, on top of all this, there is a financial crisis with the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank in the United States, and whether it will have cascading impact on other parts of the economy, because with inflation in USA and strengthening of interest rates, it has severe implications on emerging markets in terms of the wealth from emerging markets flowing back to the developed world. And therefore, in a globalized world, we are all interconnected. And G20 is important because it accounts for 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for about 78% of the global trade. It accounts for about 90% of the global patents. But more important than that, it accounts for about 2/3 of the humanity. And therefore, any decision taken by G20 has a severe implication on global economy. Now, G20 has grown and evolved as essentially an economic grouping, a grouping of finance ministers and the central bank governors to drive economic growth, prosperity, progress, and to ensure good financial management of the world. And every time there's been a crisis, whether it was 1919, whether it was 1999, or whether it was 2002 or 2008, whenever there's been a financial or a global economic growth crisis, G20 has stepped in and taken severe measures, and those have then got implemented through IMF, World Bank, and other implementing agencies. And therefore, G20 is critical. This is for the first time in the history of G20 that 4 successive presidencies of the G20 will be held by emerging markets. Starting with Indonesia last year, to India, then it goes to Brazil, and then it goes to South Africa. And therefore, if you look, this is for the first time in the history of G20 that 4 successive presidencies of the G20 will be held by emerging markets. Starting with Indonesia last year, to India, then it goes to Brazil, and then it goes to South Africa. And therefore, if you look at the economy, the global economy, what you find is that from 1999 onwards, the share in the global output, the share of the global GDP, the component of the developed world is declining, and the share of the emerging markets is growing rapidly. And probably in another decade and a half, the emerging markets will have a much greater share of the global economy than the developed world. And therefore, when President Bush took it from the finance ministers and the central bank governors to creating a leaders summit, he was very clear that global crises like the one that happened in 2002 were all interrelated. An East Asian crisis will have an impact on global economy. Similarly, a Russian ruble crisis and a Mexican peso crisis will have a global impact all over the world. And therefore, the summit needs to be raised to the leaders' level. And G20, for a successful conduct of a G20, in the midst of a big war going on and all these crises going on, to my mind, there are 3 critical components which are important. The first is the political leadership and the political narrative that India builds up for the G20. And that is important because essentially it's a leaders' summit. Prime Minister Modi is the leader for G20 during the course of the year. And therefore, the developmental perspective of India is critical, and I'll dwell on it a little bit. The second is the content, the priorities that India built up. What is India's priority? How does it want to drive the global economy? How does it want to drive the world in the future? And that is important. And the third is, how well do we do the G20 presidency? How do we execute? Because we've also done the Commonwealth Games in the past. And how well do we execute it? And therefore there are three components to it. The first and foremost is the political narrative that we are doing it in a lively, vibrant democracy. And in a lively, vibrant democracy like India, that you have an elected Prime Minister who's been elected the second time in an election and whose acceptance by the people still remains at a very high level of over 70%. And therefore, the political narrative is that you have a leader who's driving the global G20 leadership, who has very strong acceptance in a vibrant democracy. But I think more important than that is the development story that India has built up, that we are a young country which has a young demographics. Our average age is 29, and even as we go on to 2070, our average age will still be about 35. And that we've truly driven the digital transformation of India. That we are a country which has ensured a digital identity for every Indian. We've ensured that we open a bank account for every Indian, that we are able to link that bank account with Aadhaar, his digital identity, and the mobile number, and ensure that everybody can then use the mobile to make digital payments. And we do today 11x more payment than what the United States and Europe do together, and we do 4x more payment than what China does. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it's a remarkable story of digital transformation. It's also a story that we've used open source, open APIs, interoperable technology. Because if you look at the history of the world, in the last 2.5 years by Tencent and Alibaba in China, but they've owned the citizens' data and used it for artificial intelligence, machine learning. India has built up same model of United States was replicated in China. Europe took a different route, and they brought in a regulation called the GDPR, which ensured the privacy of data for citizens, but did it at huge compromise for innovation, and therefore you've not seen much innovation emerging out of Europe in the last 2 decades. India took a very different approach, where it created the public platform, the railway track, on top of which we've allowed private sector to innovate and compete in the market space. So if you look at UPI, we've connected over 500 banks with each other, but we've allowed Paytm to compete with Google Pay, Phone Pay, competes with Amazon, with Apple, everyone in the marketplace, and there are 40 different companies competing as far as payments is concerned. And that has allowed a huge amount of innovation to take place. And what it has led to is an open source, open API model with the digital identity has ensured that a company like Jio, when it launched its mobile phone, was able to do acquisition of over 200 million people in 100 days. And the cost of acquisition of a customer, which was about $25 before, had shrunk down to $1. The cost of acquisition in Europe is still about $175 to $180. Why I'm saying this is that we've done innovation to population scale at low cost, and that's important. When I was a young officer in Kerala, one of my jobs was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen. And we were able then to give them outboard motors. They could go much further into the sea. We could give them new fiberglass crafts. We could give them new technology in terms of new fishing nets and introduce beach level auctioning. But fishermen were prone to drinking. And therefore, it was very important to open their bank accounts so they could save for a bad day when they will not get a catch. But opening a bank account was a nightmare. I used to chase bank managers, know your customers, and it used to take 8-9 months to open a bank account. The identity was a problem. Today we open a bank account in India using biometric in less than a minute. So I've seen this journey of transformation from 9 months to less than a minute in India. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, my belief is that the digital transformation by Tencent and Alibaba in China, but they've owned the citizens' data and used it for artificial intelligence, machine learning. India has built up, same model of United States was replicated in China. Europe took a different route and they brought in a regulation called the GDPR, which ensured the privacy of data for citizens, but did it at huge compromise for innovation, and therefore you've not seen much innovation emerging out of Europe in the last 2 decades. India took a very different approach where it created the public platform, the railway track, on top of which we've allowed private sector to innovate and compete in the market space. So if you look at UPI, we've connected over 500 banks with each other, but we've allowed Paytm to compete with Google Pay, Phone Pay, competes with Amazon, with Apple, everyone in the marketplace, and there are 40 different companies competing as far as payments is concerned. And that has allowed a huge amount of innovation to take place. And what it has led to is an open source, open API model with the digital identity has ensured that a company like Jio, when it launched its mobile phone, was able to do acquisition of over 200 million people in 100 days. And the cost of acquisition of a customer, which was about $25 before, had shrunk down to $1. The cost of acquisition in Europe is still about $175 to $180. Why I'm saying this is that we've done innovation to population scale at low cost. And that's important. When I was a young officer in Kerala, one of my jobs was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen. And we were able then to give them outboard motors. They could go much further into the sea. We could give them new fiberglass crafts. We could give them new technology in terms of new fishing nets and introduce beach level auctioning. But fishermen were prone to drinking. And therefore, it was very important to open their bank accounts so they could save for a bad day when they will not get a catch. But opening a bank account was a nightmare. I used to chase bank managers, know your customers, and it used to take 8-9 months to open a bank account. The identity was a problem. Today we open a bank account in India using biometric in less than a minute. So I've seen this journey of transformation from 9 months to less than a minute in India. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, my belief is that the digital transformation directly into the bank account without any leakages. And what the Bank of International Settlement said, that India has achieved in 7 years what it would have taken 50 years to achieve. In the normal course, what it would have taken 50 years, it achieved in 7 years. So that the transformational story of India is immense. Many of us do not realize it because we are seeing it on a day-to-day basis. The other important story is also to tell you the story of the transformation in terms of development, because India has been able to provide close to about 30 million houses. Now 30 million houses really means that we have provided a house to almost every single citizen of Australia. Every single citizen of Australia. It's also important to understand that we've been affordable houses we've provided about 110 million toilets. 110 million toilets in India is like providing a toilet to every citizen of Germany. Every citizen of Germany. That's the population of Germany. We provided 243 million people piped water. In the last 5 years, 243 million piped connection means that we provided water to every single person in Brazil. That's the size of Brazil. And we built 55,000 kilometers of road. That's like 1.5 times the diameter of the earth. That's the size and scale of transformation. And during the COVID period, we provided 2.2 billion people COVID vaccination, which is totally paperless and cashless. I mean, it was all digital. And therefore, the story of India in terms of the infrastructure build, road, houses, toilets, electricity connection, in terms of piped water, in terms of COVID vaccination is an amazing story. And therefore, my view is that this developmental perspective of India is to be highlighted very strongly during the G20 presidency, and that is the development narrative. The second key critical component to my mind is what are the priorities before the world? And what I dwell on some of them. The first and foremost is that at a point of time when there is a global slowdown, it's very important to push for inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth. Because without growth, you will not be able to transform lives of citizens across the world. And when leaders of the world meet, it's very important for them to look at the lives of citizens. And therefore, how do you achieve sustained growth on a long period of time to transform lives is very critical. And this is important because, as I said, we are midway between the 2030 goal of sustainable development goals. Instead of progressing, we have regressed. We've fallen back. The world has fallen back from what it had said, that it will transform lives of citizens through the sustainable development goals. Now, if the COVID has impacted lives, inflation has impacted life, the progress made in the last 20 years, the world had lifted people above the poverty line through free trade. That has, in the last 3 years, people have got below the poverty line. And therefore, how do you accelerate the pace of growth is critical. And how do you build up a new action plan for sustainable development goals, which will enable you to actually accelerate the progress of growth. And this is very critical to our mind. The third very critical issue is that is about climate action and climate finance. Because, as we are all aware, the developed world, when they were industrialized, have carbonized the world. 88% of the total carbon space available, that is 2,800 gigatons of carbon space available at 1.5 degree centigrade, 2,400 gigatons has already been occupied by the developed world. India has occupied only 1.5% of the total carbon space available with 52 gigatons. Though logically, as per our population, we are entitled to about 17.5% of the total carbon space available. But irrespective of that, it's important to understand that we will, in due course, as we industrialize, the rest of the world has already urbanized, the rest of the world has already industrialized, our movement has just begun. And as we take this onward march for the next 3 decades of consistent rates of growth, and as we urbanize, as we industrialize, we'll become a major polluter. And therefore, India's challenge is to become the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. And my belief is that it's important because the future belongs to those who digitize and those who go green. And countries and companies which go green will attract value and they will attract capital in due course. And my belief is that it's important because the future belongs to those who digitize and those who go green. And countries and companies which go green will attract value and they will attract capital in due course. And therefore, it's very important that India adopts a very clean approach and a green growth approach. So the Prime Minister has committed to Panch Amrit at Glasgow, very ambitious goals. We've achieved our NDC targets committed at COP21 in Paris 9 years ahead of schedule. We do about 172 gigawatts of renewable energy. And we've now launched the Green Hydrogen Mission, which will ensure that we use renewable to crack water and produce green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is important because even if we do 100% renewable energy, there are hard-to-abate sectors, what are known as refineries, fertilizer, steel, cement, long-distance transport. These all use fossil fuel. They cannot be transformed by renewable energy. Renewable energy, even if we do 100% electricity with renewable, that's only 20% of the energy. The balance 80% of the energy is all hard-to-abate sectors. And these sectors have to be decarbonized. And therefore, India is climatically blessed. India's entrepreneurship is top class. We have the possibility of becoming the lowest cost producer, the lowest cost exporter in the world, and the world will head towards green hydrogen. The challenge is about availability of low-cost financing. Our ability to get 30 years financing at low cost for climate finance is critical. there is no shortage of money in the world. The world is flushed with resources. The world is flushed with resources, but they are not able to find money into emerging markets because the risk profile of India is different. The interest rates in the United States are 1.5%. The interest rates in India are about 8%. The interest rates in Africa are about 15%, and in sub-Saharan regions they are 22%. And therefore, Africa and sub-Saharan countries find it difficult to attract money. The challenge is how do we get 30 years financing in dollar terms at 1 or 2% with good hedging instruments. Now the challenge is that multilateral financial institutions like World Bank and IMF were made in the post-World War II era. They are creations of the Bretton Woods Agreement when there was no challenge of SDG, there was no challenge of climate action. And therefore these institutions need to become institutions for supporting climate action and SDGs, and they need to ensure that private funds flow in, they are de-risked through new instruments like blended finance, like first loss guarantees and credit enhancement, and then you are able to get long-term financing. Once emerging markets get long-term financing, they will become the champions of climate action and climate change. Without that, Indian entrepreneurs will find it very difficult to do long-term financing. And therefore, India's fourth key priority is that there must be a huge transformation in the multilateral financial institutions which were made in the Bretton Woods period, and they need to become agents of greater credit flows to emerging markets, and this is important. That is the fourth priority. And the fifth priority is about digital transformation. It's about bringing right in front the digital public infrastructure that India has built up. We've done it not merely in fast payments, we've done it across COVID, we've done it through Diksha and Swayam, we've done it through FASTag, we've done it through DigiLocker, many areas. But it's important to understand that in the world today, there are 4 billion people without a digital identity. We've done it not merely in fast payments, we've done it across COVID, we've done it through Diksha and Swayam, we've done it through FASTag, we've done it through DigiLocker, many areas. But it's important to understand that in the world today, there are 4 billion people without a digital identity. There are 2.5 billion people who do not even have a bank account. There are 133 countries in the world who do not have a digital fast payments. Now, India has been able to transform lives of citizens, become a more productively efficient economy because of digitization. And therefore, how do we take this model of India to the rest of the world is the challenge. And we'll use the G20 narrative to push this digital transformation story of India to the rest of the world and see how we can use this opportunity to transform the lives of citizens in the global south. And the last priority which the Prime Minister has put forth is about, for him it's very important, is about women-led development. That is important because today in India there are more women, many of us are not aware. The new NFHS survey says that there are 1,022 women to 1,000 men. There are more women than men in India, and actually around the world. And therefore, like in India and like in the rest of the world, it is not possible to grow sustainably, it's not possible to transform lives till we are not able to put women into positions of leadership, we are not able to do more financial inclusion, we are not able to improve learning outcomes and health outcomes of women, we are not able to change the whole cycle of malnutrition by ensuring that women produce healthy children who are not very healthy children. Therefore, there is a need to focus on women as very major architects of growth. And therefore, women-led development is a very key priority for India. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've dwelt on the development priority, the perspective of how political narrative is important in G20. I've dwelt on what is the priorities of India. Let me dwell on a little bit more on how India is doing the G20. Other countries do. Other countries hold G20 in 1 or 2 cities of their country. They do it in their capital. And India could have done this in Delhi, all the meetings, and they could have been very official meeting. But the Prime Minister decided that he'll use this opportunity to make this into a people's movement. He'll convert this into a Jan Andolan and use this G20 actually to take it out to every state of India. So we're doing 215 meetings in all the states and union territories of India. We're doing it in 59 cities of India. We're using this opportunity to transform every single city of India where we are taking it in terms of their drainage, sewage, solid waste, in terms of improving the quality of urban infrastructure. So when we had the Sherpa meeting in Udaipur, the Fatehpur lake was transformed, the roads were done up. We've just finished a meeting in Kumaragam in the backwaters of Kerala, the Kerala government, which is an opposition-run state. But it's a great example of cooperative federalism. They transformed the backwaters, they built up a new convention center which will make Kumaragam a 365 days a year destination. They brought in new houseboats, they really transformed the roads. So Kumaragam became one of the top destinations, and actually Aurangabad, Pune, all these cities have been transformed simply because of G20. So we are using this opportunity to really transform the cities. The other thing we are doing is to use this power to the G20 to push the brand entity of the states in terms of their culture. So everywhere we are doing only local state culture. How do we promote and market the state culture? How do we promote market their handloom, their handicraft, one district, one product? We are using this opportunity to push for millets in a big way. So every meal has a millet component to it. We've done everything possible to bring a unique brand entity for every single state of India. So ladies and gentlemen, my belief is that G20 is a very unique opportunity. It's an opportunity to brand, promote, market India, but more than that, it's an opportunity to drive the destiny of the world through our leader. It's an opportunity to transform the states and the cities. It's an opportunity to push for priorities which will be transformational for the world. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we are doing G20 in a very, very different manner. We are differentiating it from anything else. If you look at a world football tournament, it's held for 14 days. If you look at a cricket tournament, it's held for about 20 days. If you look at a tennis tournament, it's held for 10 days. But here, G20 is being done for a whole year, and this